Hey everybody, welcome to this lecture, which is an illumination, kind of a visualization of this reading. It's about Crete. It's by Riane Eisler. What an amazing life, and she's still alive and living in Pacific Grove. I think she's in her 90s now, but the reading is from this book, and she's also done a lot of other. I'll let you look into it. But my point here is to illuminate what this is about in the specific culture of the Minoans and where they came from. The Mediterranean, right? This is their hood, the Aegean, and the Aegean was their culture was centered on Crete, and here's the Aegean, and below is the Libyan Sea. But all around, think of the swimming pool of the Mediterranean were aggressive powers that were bumping into each other a lot. The Hittites, all the cultures of the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. Here's Palestine, right, and Egypt. So, anyways, everybody, including in Northern Europe, were bumping into each other a lot, and there was a lot of aggression. But not so with the Minoans. How is it speculated that Minoan culture came into existence? This bubble. It started out, there's a lot of other theories that have come and gone, but historians are now saying that it came from Turkey, places like Catalhayuk, and these are pictures of Catalhayuk, and this whole area was a network of the first Neolithic cultures. In other words, people stopped being hunters and gatherers, started to slow down, stay in one place, band together, use their resources together. They actually built the first towns and or cities. So they could do this, they could grow their own food, and they could raise their own animals and live that way in more sustenance and more stability of life. So anyways, Neolithic life. The Greeks, way after, talked about all these first people and the Minoans and said that first culture that came to Crete, their myth is that the queen was brought to Crete and her name was Europa. Yeah, think. And she was abducted by Zeus in the form of a white bull, right? Their reverence for bulls because it gave them safety and stability in their lives. So you tend to idealize and almost make into religious symbols those things that are so important to you, right? Also was the lions and or leopards in Catalhayuk, which were symbols of female power, right? And that is something that you see transferred over in other symbols of the Minoans, and also later embraced by the Mycenaeans. So these people were these incredible shipbuilders. And I mean, you think they had to get out the islands and navigate the islands. So that's how they got there, and they were good at it. And they were adventurers. And in this era, they set up these incredible trade routes all over. And most of the people were sedentary, but they weren't sedentary. They were not only in their neighborhoods, here's their neighborhood. Look, Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. They were all over the place, including way up here in the Baltic Sea. And there are signs of them in Great Britain, all over. And here, which is where the Celts originally came from. We think of the Celts being from here, but the Celts originally were all over Europe, and especially in the Danube River Valley. And the signs are that you find symbols that are specific to the Minoans all over the place where they, like, wow, really? They were all the way up there? Here's another thing. Early Minoan symbols, later Celtic symbols. You think? So art does tell us stuff, right? All right, so basically they had a technology and an ability with that technology that nobody else did. And everybody else was staying close to the land. They were afraid of the open ocean, even the Egyptians. And they did the best they could. But I think the Minoans became everybody's go-to and basically freighters, truckers. You wanted something somewhere, they got it there for you. Everybody else was doing this, using tow lines, whereas they were way out on the open ocean. They were not afraid of it, and they seemed to have had some nautical abilities that were uncanny. They could get places and read the stars and know the seasons and go long distances. This is just a conjecture, but there are even signs of them having been way out beyond the gates of Gibraltar to way other places. It's kind of a tabloid thing, but their stories are there, and there's some credible evidence, but it's still a big mystery. In any event, these capabilities helped them glean from many other cultures and to avoid the negativity of others. And the story goes that because everybody wanted to see them, because they were always bringing you something or trading something, they had a kind of a non-aggressive way of dealing with. If you didn't play well with them as a trader, they just didn't show up again or for another 100 years. So people tended to have good relations with them. So for 4,000 years, this kind of went too. They were the big honeybees, pollinating honeybees of the Mediterranean. The swimming pool, they were the ones that got things done and got things around. They also were great weavers, and with the arts. It'd be wonderful to actually be able to see some of this beautiful work that they did that is disintegrated, of course. They were metallurgists, not only bronze, right? Copper and tin, which was the name of the name for the Bronze Age and the weapons that were made, but also other things, gold, again, the honeybees. And look at the symbols of all the things that are on their metallurgy, and try to find something that's not life-affirming, that's not positive. Try to find something that's violent or aggressive or about some kind of dominance, and you just don't find it. So anyways, and their architecture was also very human scale, and their pottery, they were advanced potters, and for the time, using potter's wheels and making really beautiful work, as I showed you in the last lecture, and kilns, of course, to make these huge things, which mostly were storage containers. And I've showed you some of these, but also their pottery, which is devoid of anything but references to nature, and there's no soldiers on it, and that kind of thing. Anyways, how'd they become called the Minoans? Way later, the Greeks told the story of King Minos, and it's specifically, look it up. There's this myth that the Greeks used to say how they started to sort of take over from the Minoans, and that's the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur on Crete. And none of this was known about. It was thought it was all just a myth and never existed. This fellow, Arthur Evans, started to figure it out and excavate in Crete in the early 20th century. So only been 100 years. So what is it about their social organization that's interesting? The status of men and women seems to have been equal, and the distribution of wealth also seems to be relatively equal. And they avoided this stuff. Surrounding societies were doing this pretty much. Scarcity, aggression, all that kind of stuff. And that caused a lot of the cultures. The Minoans weren't the only ones. There's a lot of cultures that were like them. They were the last ones to kind of still hold out, though. But they were starting to be taken over by more aggressive, warlike belief systems and cultures. So everywhere except for the Minoans, they were, as I said, the holdouts. And this incredible harmony between men and women is something that didn't happen. Especially at that time. And historians use words like sensitivity, grace of life, beauty in nature to describe this bubble of within an era in history that was otherwise showed a lot of dominance, destruction, and oppression. There weren't, as I've said, on all their artwork, on everything they do, there's not battle scenes and hunting and stuff like that. It's just not what they thought was interesting. It's not what they got up and thought about, what am I going to do today? And that wasn't it. So what was the philosophical glue? And the philosophical glue seems to be a belief system. And it was, nobody knows what it was, but it made them somehow fearless. And they didn't have the same taboos about their life. Didn't have the same taboos about each other. In other cultures, women weren't even really human. They were, kind of property and all that kind of stuff. Not there. It was this belief system was a different one. And it would be fascinating to know more specifics about it, but at the moment we don't. It's all conjecture. And what was a unique physical exercise and sport? This kind of tells you about how they dealt with each other too, is that men and women both participated. This is color-coded, and the men were depicted darker and the women lighter, but from running to all sports, and even in all areas of life, men and women both participated. This is the Toriadore Games. which was this kind of elegant dance and a ritual in which men and women took place. It was also kind of dangerous, but it was a huge spectator sport, and it was kind of like soccer these days. For them, it was a big deal. Writing, some of the first writing, human writing, as far as phonetic writing, is detected in Crete. And that led to the first bureaucracies. And they were great bureaucrats, and that had really, in the right hands, or their form of government, helped them to share labor and divide labor and get more done efficiently. And this, in adjacent civilization, power and technology was used pretty much to consolidate everything in the hands of the ruling class, but not in Minoan Crete. Things were pretty much divided, pretty much, right? The statuses, the closest example of any kind of statuses of like a ruler or king, queen, or something like that being more important than everybody else, were things like this, where this is all we can find is processions and stuff like that. There's no big, huge symbols to leaders applauding them. So anyways, also the way they lived was elegant, but it was not grandiose, and it was not over the top. It was beautiful spaces, but it wasn't ostentatious. What modern form of government seems to have been foreshadowed in Minoan Greece? Well, democracy, basically. We always think of that as being associated with Greeks, but the Greeks learned it from someone, and it was from them. In contrast, at the time, all the other cultures around them had rigid social stratification and really declining statuses of women, but not so in Greece. The beginning of the end. So this is such a great thing. What happened? Well, it was natural disasters that started to do it, and it was a series of earthquakes. Most notably, I should go back and show you this. There was a bunch of them, and there's all these signs of them having to rebuild. Things would get knocked down and they rebuild. Things would get knocked down and they rebuild. And they did it pretty well. And that's how you divide Minoan culture into different eras. But there was one that happened, Thera, which was such a huge explosion. They say it's the largest explosion in human history, and they find traces of it in the ice caps. And that's how they know when the times it was huge. Anyways, it completely devastated their population, their fleets, their ports, their cities, their agriculture. Everything was scrambled, and that allowed the Mycenaeans, who lived nearby and were warlike, to start to swoop. And even though they did, the Mycenaeans still paid homage and maintained many of the practices of the Minoans. But one big tell is that not only in the Mycenaean culture, but in all cultures around, you started to get fortifications, this kind of thing, obsessions with being safe and protecting yourself against your neighbors. And that was found at this fortification, which is Mycena. Also, the pottery began to be more stiff, and on it were signs of power struggles and power politics and all that kind of stuff, which just didn't happen with the Minoans. And also, last big excursions and battles with other people, like the conquest of Troy. So what became of the Minoans, and what are the remnants that has happened with this culture, right? It was such a great example for so long. We're talking thousands of years. Stay tuned, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, done for now. Talk to you guys later.